Welcome to the Biotech Startups podcast by Exceeder. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, and experienced investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup, from pre-seed to IPO, with your host, Jon Chee. In our last episode, we spoke with Michael Chen about his Taiwanese-American upbringing in a data-driven household, which fueled his journey into scientific research and entrepreneurship. We also heard about his early lab experiences at Emory University and Georgia Tech, and the challenges and discoveries that came with moving to the UK for his PhD at the University of Cambridge. If you missed it, be sure to go back and listen to part 1. In part 2, we continue our conversation with Michael as he shares his journey from graduate studies to co-founding Nuclera, reflecting on the unique challenges scientists encounter in the business world, the importance of adaptability, and key lessons in developing and marketing a breakthrough product. Michael also offers insights into navigating Big Pharma's lengthy sales cycles, building successful partnerships, and the critical importance of delivering value to customers.
Just hang out. It's all good. We can, we got some time to burn. And so as you're under, it's go time, it's crunch time. And I know you touched on it a little bit before, how you met your co-founders, how you kind of like formulated this, but just now that we have all this context, can you talk? And, I'll also say graduate studies is very different than entrepreneurship. So I'm interested in kind of like when like that, how was that experience taking the leap into it? And can you talk again and tell us about that formation with you and your co-founder and deciding to take that leap of faith?
Yes and no. And perhaps grad studies should be more similar to entrepreneurship than
the uncertainty for sure. And sometimes the difficulty and grind.
Well, what I really appreciate about the structure of the NIH Oxcam program is it brought this American sense of ambition to they're hiring the best. They're bringing on board the best people one of their I don't know this for a fact. I must believe that one of their major KPIs is tier 1 publications, right? For the program, and you pump money through this program with a sense of urgency that's reinforced by the timeline. You got to finish in 4 years. And if you spend a little more time, you don't have forever, right? So just, sense of urgency, structure and timeline, and money and well-resourced environments, lo and behold, you get gold, right? You do get performance. And I think that's not so different from being an entrepreneur. Your timeline is when your cash runs out, because not everyone's willing. Not everyone's willing. Like the issue with I think a lot of PhD programs is there's not that your funding. It may run out, but a lot of times it's just like infinite, right? You don't have a timeline. Your timeline is finish the project. Your timeline is not. If you don't do it in this time, you're going to get kicked out. Right? So, and the major difference in a company is you have a finite amount of time, because people will stop working for you, including your co-founders, and with you, if you're not able to pay them, right? So, and that is your cost. That is your timeline. The team that you have around you working to create, not time, but opportunity, right? That's not what the, cash brings you. It's not time, but opportunity. So what are you doing with that cash, in order to create shareholder value, in order to bring about a unifying mission, in order to get this group of people to deliver just way more that was invested than what was invested into your company, and especially at the valuation that money was invested at. So, I think a real key difference and a strong learning point for me is the difference between academic research and industrial research, and there's sort of like this weird in between of startup research, right? Is when you have such tight time pressures and you need to de-risk, right? It's like asking a PhD student, how do you guarantee me that you shoot for a Nature paper, but you at least get a JAX paper or a PNAS paper, right? How do you guarantee that? That's like saying, how do you guarantee your product development is going to finish at this level and you aim for this level, right? Or how do you guarantee that you get this revenue level and you aim for this revenue level, right? When you have that type of mentality, I don't think that's what most PhD programs have. They say, oh, you got to get a paper, right? Well, that's very fluffy, right? In the startup world, you either do it or you die. You're just like kicked out of there, right? What that brings about is, the companies that succeed as quickly as possible bring in structure, bring in focus on risk, bring in customers, discard the mentality of if I build it, they will come, as quickly as possible. And it's really up to the founders to realize that as quickly as possible, that they don't know everything, that they need to bring in this mentality. Otherwise, it will nosedive. It will. And that's the real key. And that's why you see at some point, founders transition out, and you see professional management come in, right? Or experience management come in. And it just depends on the ability for founders and entrepreneurs to realize that as quickly as possible, that the idea is less important than your ability to execute on it in a professional manner.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, and it's good to think about those things early on too, because I think sometimes people are more reactionary than kind of being proactive about this stuff. And then when you're reactionary, it's too late. So it's like thinking about this for anyone who's starting the journey is like critically important. And so, can you tell us a little about, your start with Nuclera and what you and your co-founders with, like, obviously you felt the problem firsthand, but what is the state of the market and why is it that way? And then can you tell us how Nuclera disrupts that and really changes the status quo?
So I hinted at this, we didn't start out doing protein work. Well, we started out doing protein work, actually. That's what we started out doing. But it was protein work for an application, which was enzymatic DNA synthesis. We're like, okay, there's probably a way to make this DNA thing better, right? DNA currently today is almost exclusively synthesized by phosphoramidite chemistry. This organic process that, as the saying goes, uses a lot of organic waste, is not green, is inefficient because it's step by step. How do we harness biology in order to, make DNA way more efficiently? We make billions of bases in our bodies. How do we use that in order to make access to DNA really, really quick? Well, unfortunately, I think that's where sort of the technology didn't meet the dreams and aspirations in the entire marketplace. Okay, I'm not just talking about Nuclera, I'm talking about everyone who's going after enzymatic DNA synthesis, because the body does DNA, making in a very different way than phosphoramidite chemistry, or even most of the ways that, enzymatic DNA synthesis startups are thinking about it. It's that they're copying DNA. Our bodies copy DNA. So it's a processive polymerase that adds nucleotides to a template, right? So that template exists. So the key is not to thinking about transferring that ability from the body. It's to how do you make the damn template in the first place, and that's the issue with de novo DNA synthesis. Nothing seems very convincing from the entire marketplace of how startups can really effectively, efficiently take enzymes to just outcompete how phosphoramidite chemistry does things, because ultimately at the end of the day, they're still doing a stepwise process, right? Either it's using phosphoramidite chemistry or it's using enzymes to build a single piece of nucleotide at a time. I think maybe the folks that are starting to, make progress in this area are folks like Ansa Bio, Elogen, and others. But there's still, I think the jury's still out for whether or not this entire sector can innovate to something that's better than the status quo, right? And it took us a lot of time and money to realize that, right? We were doing all this protein work, protein engineering, in order to make better enzymes to synthesize DNA in a stepwise fashion. But we just realized from an economic sense, so let's fast forward several years when this technology works and where the market is going. Doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense how much we need to charge relative to what Emily is doing at Twist or GeneArt, IDT, and GenScript and GeneWiz are doing, right? So we said, okay, let's figure out a way to make that DNA valuable, right? People make DNA valuable in various different ways, so I really like what DNA 2.0, Atum, did. I don't know if you're familiar with that company, but they turned their DNA making process they added so much value onto it. They did code optimization. I remember they're one of the first to really pound that home. They put it into the vectors that you want. They do engineering for you even. So they're adding a lot of value to their DNA services and then putting the cost of that DNA into that entire project. And so that was a really, I think, a strong inspiration for saying, so where is ultimately all this DNA going, right? Gene synthesis, which is a very specific wedge of the pie of the DNA synthesis market. So DNA synthesis today is, if you're being charitable, $2 to $2.5 billion per year, TAM. Really well studied from the gene synthesis side that the TAM of that wedge is, if you're being charitable again, about $500 million, right, per year. Where's all of that going? That's going into protein making. Okay. Most of that is going into protein making. So, and we were thinking, what's the bottleneck for us in the enzymatic DNA synthesis function? What was the bottleneck during my PhD? It was just getting the damn protein in the first place. And so at Nuclera, we evolved into this mission of let's accelerate discovery by making protein production fast and easy, right? And so we said, okay, should we do this? And this is a classic issue that's faced by any device or service company. Should we offer a service? Should we offer a tool? Or should we make a drug from it, from that unique capability? And I think, if you're creating an Illumina instrument, next generation sequencing instrument, at that time, the state of the art was Sanger sequencing. Okay, so people did Sanger sequencing, right? And Illumina slash Celexa could have gone into services, or they could have gone into tools. They went into tools. Why? Because there were a lot of big sequencing centers at that point. And so do you want to compete against the sequencing center, or do you want to compete against Sanger sequencing? You want to compete against Sanger sequencing, and you want to harness the channel of sales, these sequencing centers, to sell your instrument, your tool. So really admired that model, right? And we then said, well, do we want to compete against the protein maker, or do we want to empower the protein maker? And so we set out about empowering the protein maker, saying, how can we give you tools so that you can make your proteins more easily and harness literally, up to 10,000 protein maker, outfits that are out there with eProtein discovery, our benchtop system that takes DNA in both linear form and soon to be circular plasmid form, and rapidly screens that DNA for the best sequences and conditions to get soluble, purifiable protein. And what our vision is, ultimately, when we fast forward 5 or 10 years, is that all protein projects begin on eProtein discovery. And so that really helps guide us on what our protein product development is, where we need to go, and how we need to approach the marketplace, right? So yeah, that's that.
That's super cool, honestly. And I think the analysis, I like that analysis. Like, do we become a CRO? Do we sell the tool, or we make therapeutic or the drug? And then also the analysis of like, do we want to fight against or empower? Is it an interesting analysis and lens of your initial business model? And I think something that entrepreneurs sometimes sleep on is that the science is going to just be enough. The science is sound, but not, and kind of undervalue the initial business model, and making sure that you find alignment and resonance in that business model. Because I think there's plenty of great science that kind of, languishes because of poorly aligned or optimized business models. But when you find that business model where there's alignment and affinity, it starts to feel like the wind is at your back, rather than this kind of thing where you say, are we going to fight against the protein makers? And then the wind's coming at your front. And so I really like that analysis. And when you've made this decision for your business model, how did you initially conceptualize your initial go-to-market? Because that's that's a whole thing.
By accident. I mean, it's like, people are always saying, the thing that we struggled with a lot was, we were part of this accelerator program in Cambridge, at the University of Cambridge Judge Business School. It was called the accelerator. I can't remember the exact name, but they had all these tools, the business canvas. What is the value prop? You end up learning all these terms. And, one of these was, what is your go-to market? What does that look like? Or like, what does that mean?
Yeah. Define this. Define this.
Yeah. You really don't know until you actually do it. Right. So what does that mean? What does go-to market exactly mean? And I guess we just sort of stumbled through it, right? And that, just speaking honestly and frankly, tell me if you had a different, experience.
No, it was exactly the same, because so Exceeder started as just me at a dining room table. And so my go-to-market was cold calling. So I did a year and a half of cold calling. Which you can imagine is it was a very formative experience, let's say, getting that many no's for a year and a half. But we did.
I say I hate you, because I hate cold callers. They call me like in the middle of meetings. It's like I answer thinking it's someone important, and they're like, "Can I interest you?" And like, no, just send me an email. But,
But see, like Steve, that's the thing, right? It builds there's a certain amount of thick skin and being able to take a no that I had not had before. And that was the go-to-market like initially. And also, and we secured our first deal off of that. Or I mean, when I say we, I mean me. I secured the first deal off a cold call, and the timing just happened to be good. I lucked into it. Like I called at the right time, at the right moment. And it was a medicinal chemistry CRO in like Foster City, and they needed a Teledyne flash chromatograph. And that was the start, right? It was just, I just needed that. But it was definitely feeling around in the dark. Like, I mean, this was, all the sales tools and all these cool kind of like enablement tools didn't exist. It was just like me just like trying to figure out how to contact these people. And then the other aspect of like the go-to-market is like, I was thinking about how, me just doing this is not scalable to create an actual business. Like one instrument is not enough. We need to do more instruments. And so I learned how to do marketing. Because I think about marketing, some people think of it as like a cost center, but I truly think of it as a investment. Because it's almost like sales at scale. How can I multiply Jon? Obviously you can't clone people, but I was like, I need something that resembles cloning Jon, because I can't afford to hire someone else. So that go-to-market was, okay, I had to learn quick how to do marketing. And that was a world of, a brave new world for me too. So that was our go-to-market, really. It was like a combination of cold calling and learning how to do digital marketing. And yeah, I mean, that's my experience. I can't say that's what, everyone else's should be or is, but that was my experience.
Well, I like that. I'm going to start, the two quotes I took away from this: make sure you're segmenting, and sales at scale.
Yeah.
There you go. It's basically market.
Yeah, exactly. And also like digital marketing too. I think one thing people forget is that the internet doesn't sleep. Whereas like salespeople do.
And you're just full of quotes to the internet doesn't sleep.
Yeah. People are going to make fun of me on the internet, so whatever. But that was another thing too. I was like, okay, how can I get mileage when I'm not able to hit the phone? I need coverage. The internet just can do it for me. And so that was kind of how I conceptualized it. I was like, okay, like if it can do things while I'm sleeping, hopefully it will improve my success when I'm doing in-person things, or like I eventually started showing up places. But yeah, like, I mean, I'm always interested because like your sale is like, so for me, I think what's a little bit different is that leasing, there's a bit of a familiarity. Like people have, rented an apartment before. So it's like, I don't have to explain necessarily what renting something is, but your platform's like differentiated, like N of one. Like I guess how was that experience for you, explaining this novel technology that doesn't exist? You have to like explain to someone who's on the other side. It's like, okay, like you have to explain this to me. Like I have never heard of this before. How did you work through that?
Well, I wish we had the answer. Boom! The first time we had to start pitching out, but we didn't really. It was just trial and error, right?
Yep.
So I knew protein making was slow. Okay. And my experience wasn't so dissimilar to you, right? You basically can't afford a chief commercial officer of Salesforce at that time. You can't even afford HubSpot and Salesforce.
Yeah, exactly. Even the CRMs, like, I can't even afford this. This is too much. It's a bridge too far.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't afford any of that. Our really focusing on our business model, empowering, and even that, your business model, you're not even sure of at that point.
Yeah.
You can't even articulate a clear business model at that point, because you don't have the empirical, or you don't have the evidence to back it up, right? So you're still of two minds of different things, right? what we knew was we needed to find protein makers. Okay, we needed to find protein scientists, and we also knew that it's just like in the laboratory, you don't really want to be motivated by getting a Nature paper, but you are.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
want to be motivated by the experiment, the journey, et cetera. But you are motivated by getting the Nature paper, right? So for us, our motivation was making sure that we get the next funding round. And what do we need to build as pieces of evidence to get that next funding round? Well, it's making sure that you find value and associate like what you're doing, what you're spending this money on, and associate that value with someone who's willing to pay, because that is ultimately the core of the business model. Building something that takes less money than what someone in the marketplace is willing to pay for it, right? And then gross margin becomes that KPI, right? So who's willing to pay a lot of money? And I remember I started to get involved, and this is me, right, at Nuclera. We were like 20 or 30 people at that point. This is me, talking to people on, I think this was at the height of COVID, actually, in these like remote or virtual BD type things. And what was it? I think it was Biotech Gate of virtual business event. And, I was just sending the equivalent of cold calling, cold messages to a bunch of people, mostly targeting Big Pharma, targeting alliance and innovation managers and stuff like that. And then one person got back to us, right? This innovation manager from biopharmaceuticals. And ultimately that led us to working with them, right? So, we showed, okay, well, if there's that one, there must be other pharma that are interested in this. And we sort of, built our way up from 1 to 2 to 3. Now we're at 7 or 8 right now. So, you build your way up that pharma ladder, and you generate all of the pieces of evidence necessary to build your way up that pharma ladder. You justify greater amounts of investment, and then you build the team around that in order to make sure that you are targeting that pharma. So pharma, there's a very specific persona that we've really narrowed in on that we target within large pharma right now. And I won't pretend we have all the answers. You mentioned make sure you're segmenting. We thought we had segmenting really down. Maybe we're reevaluating things at the moment at how we segment the marketplace, because you can segment persona the same. When you just take the persona and flip it into person, right? Here's the efficiency.
Yeah.
And you can segment them different ways, right? Because the same person can use your product in different ways depending on how you're marketing, the use that they see it with. And in the protein world, we think that's based on protein class, right? So the types of proteins that you're working on, this is a generalization, but that's what segmenting is, right?
Yep.
Largely dictate what you're doing. So if you're working on antibodies, you're doing something very specific in that workflow. You're working on membrane proteins, you're doing something very specific in that workflow. If you're working on soluble, you're doing something very specific in that workflow. So that's how we sort of just keep stumbling in to that go-to-market strategy. And I'm always trying to think, we have been more successful if we had like all that infrastructure and all that knowledge up front. But that's like saying you have a crystal ball.
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist.
I think you need to just, your go-to market is finding people who are willing to pay and working out a plan over time of how you're efficiently and effectively able to find those people.
Yep.
And that ultimately is sales and marketing and the entire funnel, right? How do you find the people that are willing to pay? And hopefully you do, because if you don't, well, then boom, that's the end of your company, right? So how do you find those people? Are there patterns that you can associate with those people? Segmenting, always be segmenting. And where do you find them so that you don't have to pay the exact same amount of money to your sales force in order to find the exact same number of customers, right?
Yep.
So if the dollars into your sales force is the same as the dollars coming in from your from your customers, well, then you have a major a scalability issue there. So yeah, I just like to break it down to that simply. What is your plan? Go to market is what is your plan to find and test whether or not the people that you think are going to pay, okay, are actually going to pay. And the way
that's an interesting. I just want to. Sorry, I'm interrupting, but just pause right there. It's like sometimes the people when I found when I was like talking to them, they're like, yeah, we'll pay, and then you put it in front of them, and they're like, not too much, and it's like, you told me you would do this. So that's something I always found out is just like you have to kick the tires on that too, and not take what they said at face value. Like you really have to like unearth, like you have to unearth, like, is this actually painful for you? How painful? I need you to give me the honest truth right now. So sorry, that's just like I empathize.
Yeah, exactly. I won't tell you how many times customers have told us, yes, we'll do this. No, they won't. Right.
Yeah, no, they won't.
So it's you got to be very, very, very careful with that. And I think that's where the numbers game wins. But our go-to-market was identifying people who wanted to suffer the pain of handling our first system tests, right?
Yeah.
Because those are the people with the most acute pain. I mean, they're busy, right? These are drug hunters. These are people who have a very critical mission in front of them, and they're in large environments that typically don't tolerate that much failure, right? So even though just drug hunting I would say an inefficient pursuit given the failure rate, but necessary, right?
Yep.
These people do not have the time to muck around, right?
Yep.
The reason why they're giving you their time, which is equivalent to their willingness to pay, right? That I think has been a key learning. The people who are willing to give you time are the people who are willing to pay, right? And the more time they give you, the more willing they will pay. And identical to investors, actually. So the more time an prospective investor gives to you, the more they're willing to buy the goods that you're selling. And the goods that you're selling, shares in your company, right? And so, so finding those people, especially in a company that doesn't have a product or has an immature product, right, is the key to your go-to market, like the absolute core of your go-to market. And a plus is connecting that to the scale of the opportunity, right? What market size is, and showing, just painting a picture of a hockey stick up into the, billions, right? So that's the art, and doing it quickly.
Yeah, as your grad school has just put you in the actual, just like it's kind of like a diamond pressure, just like of 4 years. And I love that analysis of when people are willing to give you time, that means they're willing to pay, because people forget the time value, that time is money. People forget about that. And that's when you're like, yeah, it's kind of to go back to what we were talking about earlier, making buffer by hand or making media by hand. There comes a time where you're like, okay, my time is spent more, that I get higher ROI on my time elsewhere. So I'd rather have either a machine do it or someone who has the machine do it for me. So I love that analysis as like people are kind of like kicking the tires on like whether it be and this is not just like I love that you brought it from customers to investors and to even just partners. Like when you're evaluating a BD partnership or whatever partnership it may be, start like using that as kind of a KPI. It's like, how much time are they willing to give me? Oh, they must be like, this actually might be a real problem for them. Because if they, obviously, if you think about the converse and there's like, when they say buzz off, it's like, I'm not going to even give you 15 minutes. You're like, okay, well, clearly, it's like, clearly they don't even they're not going to pay for it. They can't even give me 15 minutes here. So that's really, really interesting. And as, you mentioned a lot of the, the big pharma folks that you are approaching. I guess I'm always interested in has your experience been working with big pharma as a company that, as a company that's, in the kind of stages of going to go to market, and big pharma is like big, gigantic, and mature. What has that experience been like for you? And what makes for a successful pharma partnership?
So the number one learning that we've had from pharma is sales cycles are long.
Okay. Yeah.
So and it's not just long in the traditional sense of you identify the person and you go through the funnel, right? And you pass through their IT, their purchasing, the negotiation with purchasing, where they're like, we only do net 90, and then they backhand say, oh, we'll pay you in 15 days if you do a 10% discount. And we're like, no, we'll do net 90. It's like, no, this is not an option. It's like, oh, okay. So, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Pharma is a multi-stakeholder environment that requires more sophistication to sell into. Okay. When it comes to your NDA, you got to deal with a legal department. You're not just dealing with a scrappy startup or a small business where a lot of, multiple functions are put into one division or one department, or one brain. Pharma just like subdivided every single brain cell amongst a different function, right? And so you need to get every brain cell to agree for that to form a cohesive yes, right? So that is the issue with pharma sales cycles. You start with the legal department. You start with your champion, right? You got to have your champion, the person who's going to use and pay and advocate internally. But then you have the legal department for contracts. You've got the purchasing department for how that is then ultimately dispersed. You got your logistics handling department. Oftentimes these are outsourced. Okay. Then you got IT that has a brain of its own. Okay. And doesn't care about anyone. And all in the while, the champion is trying to rope all of these folks together in order to get you to a yes, right? So that's one major learning point. But that's not the only one, right? So the sales cycle is long because not only is a multi-stakeholder environment to getting a yes, it's also a really large organization where you have multiple different types of personas that are not like approving, but rather personas that are potentially using your product, right? Just think from the pharma lens. You got in large pharma environments, traditional small molecule, large pharma environments. You've got your traditional small molecule, okay, drug discovery. You have that protein science group, okay, that could be the central protein science group, but then they could have therapeutic areas that have their own delegated protein science groups because they don't trust that central one.
Central group, yeah.
You got people who are doing biocatalysis, that are serving the chemical, and they may not be talking to the protein science group. You got antibody biologics work, which can be completely different from that protein science group. You've got also many of these small molecules have their crop science division that has a completely different ecosystem of protein science users, right? And then you then have, this is foreign from people who are just academics, because all of this is one. Protein science is sometimes disconnected from the actual end application, right? The protein user application, right? Structural biology, hit discovery, biophysics. Many times they're connected, but oftentimes they're also disconnected. So the protein groups are supplying these groups of structural biology. And so structural biology suddenly falls out as a completely separate group out of all these different personas, right? So identifying the first one to adopt can take, and plus that sales cycle can take 12 plus months. Okay, right? So the trick is getting that down to under 6 months, right? That's the real trick. And I think if you got that nailed down, then that's successful, because once you're in there, if you're demonstrating true value, you are going to radiate from that initial installation. You're going to get higher usage. You're going to get people advocating for you. And when you can do that in one pharma, you can do that in all pharma. Okay, so that's the benefit. The issue is when you have investors breathing down your neck to demonstrate revenue, right? You got to diversify your customer base in be able to do that. You got to get people who are much faster in the sales cycle. You got to get your demonstrators. You got to make sure that you're always investing in peer-reviewed publications and generation of that, because that sales cycle and peer review could be 6 months, could be 4 years, right? Could be never. So that's and that's the currency, right? You must be familiar with a company called Olink that Thermo Fisher just bought. They send out these updates where I look 2,000th publication, right? So that's a KPI that they track. We're like working on our first. God.
Yeah. God, 2,000. Like, come on.
Yeah. So and they just got bought out for billions, right? So that's the journey, getting from 1 to 2,000.
Yep.
Peer review publications. So I think that's fun.
Yeah. And I was going to say too, it's like something just like getting that first peer review, getting that first big pharma logo, it opens the door in tons of ways, I think. So it's like, I always think about, kind of those moments of kind of like these cornerstone, kind of like the folks that were willing to make the bet early and getting it across the line and making sure that experience was like stellar. And then they become kind of a cornerstone, kind of like champion for you, even outside of their org, whether it's in a big pharma org, they're like, if they move on to another opportunity, they will continue to champion you. So I think for everyone out there who's thinking about this, who's like, yes, it's like, you got to get to the yes, but also you have to have like an amazing experience afterwards. You can't just get it to yes and then have it not, fall flat. You have to continue to make sure that experience is amazing. So people, because I think it's hard to measure, but word of mouth is a super real thing. And it's like probably the strongest vote of confidence you can get, or you can go in the other way too if you fall flat on your face. And so I think, I absolutely think it's interesting hearing the kind of the disparate stakeholders that you have to kind of like corral, like herding cats. And my wife is in sales, but she sells into the government. It's kind of like similar in that way. There's like 100 different departments. Like every Zoom call that I'm like walking by, I'm like 30 people on the call, and I'm just like, oh my God, like that's a lot of people. It's like a webinar basically.
Exactly.
So that's really, really interesting. And
what did you find out were in your business, John, were the leading indicators of commercial success? Like your sales and marketing KPIs, like well, you have like all of these, monitoring KPIs, right?
Yep.
And stuff like that. But what did you find? Like, are you still revising that, evolving that, or have you really set on like a like that one thing that you look at? I don't want to call it North Star. I feel like North Stars typically like really oversimplify, and no one's ever happy with you reporting on North Star. So
Yeah.
not a total fan of that type of methodology, right? But
well, there are measurements of leading indicators, basically inputs, right? And for us, I'll talk about the early days, and we still have this in our DNA. So part of the digital marketing is, in essence, it's just a pure ROI calculation of like how much dollars into the ad machine. And then after that, kind of what is the cost per acquisition, and then what is the lifetime value of that client. And constantly just not letting that, because there are plenty of companies that just like dump money into the ad machine, and it just is a train wreck. So we are constantly monitoring how much.
But how do you connect the that pumping money into the ad machine and that output of CAC, lifetime value, et cetera? How do you connect that to the actions that your sales and marketing people are doing, like the day
like the attribution journey?
Like how, like what are you doing to reinforce that and connect that? Because I think you can have a robust monitoring mechanism, but it's identifying those actions that lead to success. That's really, really key. And I won't pretend like we have that figured out. Well,
and so it depends on the platform that you're advertising on, where there's more or less robust kind of attribution models. Attribution is basically, I guess, is in essence like a fancy term of like how much of each step like contributes to the end outcome. Pretty much like, what is the attribution? Think about the channel, think about the platform, how much dollars you go in, see it all the way through, and like chop it up into its like constituent parts, chunk it, as like you said earlier. And then once the deal is closed, you do kind of like an ROI analysis on it to make sure you're getting paid back on all that time and money that you put into that platform.
Yeah, you see where I would say that right now, all of those sorts, like we don't do a lot of paid advertisements anywhere. We have a lot of activity on LinkedIn right now. I would say that all of our digital resources are more for sales enablement at the moment, rather than lead generation. The exception to that would be we do source a lot of leads at trade shows, conferences, these types of. But it's largely salespeople use marketing resources in order to make or generate those leads. Then we think about it from the attribution to trade shows, conferences, etc. And then our salespeople are doing a lot of outreach themselves and generating the leads themselves. So going from initial contact to SQL directly, right? So I would love to figure out a way to use that paid advertising type thought process there. But I think our markets are just a bit niche to be able to do that, because you guys at Exeter, you have anyone who has a need in a non-multi-stakeholder environment for equipment, for laboratory equipment.
Yeah, and I would say like it's definitely there's some of the clients are multi-stakeholder, but they're on the smaller side. We're not working with as infrequent, or we don't work as frequently with big pharma like you might, as I'm imagining, or here at least what I'm hearing. But and something that stood out to me that you just brought up is about like the kind of in-person events. That's another element too, right? I think it all work. I think it's easy to put them into kind of silos, but they're all synergistic. And that's another buzzword, just like go-to-market is, right? It's like a synergistic thing. I think what happens is doing both, it actually gives you the 1 + 1 = 5.
Because like, let's say you meet someone at a conference the likelihood that they're going to get back to you is very low, even if you classify them as a hot lead or something like that. But then, they see you on LinkedIn, they see a webinar, they see an email, they see a LinkedIn outreach. They're like, oh, okay, well then maybe I should. They see someone else using it, all reinforce into, okay, let's move forward. Let's
Exactly.
They review publication, ultimately, that's all. And the game there is really figuring out where to put those dollars, right?
For sure. Oh yeah, and that's the $1 million question. And by the way, it's like something that you talked about earlier too, about like the kind of always evaluating the segmentation within big pharma. It's each of them, when you ultimately settle on the segment, you got to communicate to them super differently. Like we learned that that is critically important via advertising, right? That's where I cut my teeth, because if you just try to do one type of copy and just blast it, you're not gonna get the right affinity, because like everyone has a different worldview, everyone has a different priority set, right? Different pain. So you got to like fine tune your communication to make sure that you're speaking their language, whatever that language might be. Insert structural biologist, or insert maths guy.
And how did you decide? I mean, this is like the nuts and bolts of go to market, right? So this is like, and how do you guys think about segmentation in your market? Does it align with the type of organization? Does it align with the type of financing? Does it align with geography?
All of the above. So that we have like crazy matrices, and we try to. By the way, it's like the one thing I will say is that with this type of stuff, you can
overanalyze.
Exactly, you can overanalyze. Well, it's not just overanalysis; it can be overly quantitative, right? That's where marketing and advertising can kind of become, it goes too far in one direction. So we actually always try, like, we're super data informed, but we're not like, we won't make decisions purely off the data. Like, the data helps inform, but then and this is where I think it's important, is you always have to keep the empathetic like aspect to it. It's like, all right, let's like put data aside. Let's just think about this as like human beings for a moment and try to be in their shoes. And a lot of the stuff, talk about going to in-person events, being there and having these conversations is how you can get that feel. So we also do in-person events too. So we have the data, which tells us something. We have boots on the ground. All of us go and speak to people. And then that informs what do we define as the segment, and how do we communicate to the segment? And then you start testing it. But it's a combination of two, because I think oftentimes you'll fall into one or the other, but and sometimes it oscillates, and we're always checking it. And I think, and this is not just for sales either. It is, when you're trying to find partners, like
how much have you invested into like surveys, and because you can spend a lot of money doing that.
So we don't do surveys or market research, and some firms might. So I'm not trying to say that is not a way to do it. We just haven't done it. We've always found what it helps us is just getting out there and going to conferences, showing up to mixers, going to events, and really just getting as close as possible to the pulse. Because I think, at least in my opinion, when you do the surveys and you do the market research or whatever, just that group research, sometimes you can get skewed or biased data, because like the samples are like, it's kind of conflating. They're like conflating aspects to it. So we just go out there and just like have like just friendly chat and just like learn, just like kind of just like learning. And so yeah, that's how we think about it. But again, you're right. It's $1 million question. Where do you put the money? So I would say anyone who's thinking about doing something like this, it's like, you got to start off with like just like small test budgets. Like, you don't, again, kind of like what we were talking about before, you can get a lot of data that will help you feel better about your investment with just a small amount, like a small experimental budget, just like test it on the fly. You don't have to bring in the back up the truck and just dump money into it immediately. You can do really agile things in these platforms and just see if anything sticks and then iterate on it. And then when you see something sticking, we always say prune back the losers and double down on the winners. So you do a test, see if people like it, then you start backing up the truck. don't feel like you have to just like put your chip on red, spin the wheel, and then just like hope it lands on red. You don't have to do that. You can, a nominal sum. Google and all these social media platforms will take your money, even if it is $500, $1,000. They will take it gladly, and that's enough to get yourself just like some preliminary data for sure.
Yeah. I'm still, I think I'm for us pay advertisement. I think it's skeptical that we'll get to that customer, very rapidly, because there's only 10, 20,000 protein makers in the entire world, right? And
are they on LinkedIn?
Yeah, it's all LinkedIn. So that's why we do. Well,
LinkedIn has paid advertising.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? Like,
my mind's always geared towards like when you're saying Google and stuff.
Oh, yeah. So that's me just speaking from my original kind of where I cut my teeth. But like, I think LinkedIn is a crazy powerful tool for anyone, even like if you're on a job hunt, trying to find a customer, trying to find like network, all those things. And it's, I think it's incredibly powerful. And I think it's I think this is what I mentioned earlier. I think it's an investment. Like, I truly think like it can feel like a cost center, but it really does feel like an investment more than anything, because like exactly what you said before, it makes your commercial teams lives easier when they can show up to an event and they're like, someone's like, I saw you somewhere, I don't know where. Or even better, they're like, we love you, we love your insert white paper, we love your insert video series, whatever, whatever it is. And you don't get that kind of conversation or brand recognition if you don't invest in marketing. And I'm biased here. Like, I'm biased because that's how I learned how to do, those early days, those formative days. So I'm biased. So anyone, who I'm not saying marketing is going to take you to the promised land, but I would say I'm bullish on it. I think it's an investment. I don't think of it as a cost center.
Well, yeah. So,
awesome.
We sort of went from my childhood to how we do sales at scale.
Yeah, and I guess the kind of closing questions here that we always like to round it out with. I guess the first one's like, what are the goals for Nuclera in like 1 to 2 years, and for you?
What are the goals for Nuclera in 1 to 2 years? Well, I think it's always very closely associated with making sure that we translate our aspirations into financial targets, and doing that in a way that is credible and are things that we can actually hit that will make our investors happy and our customers happy. It's really, really key to connect the story to how we make a return on investment, right? And so I think at Nuclera, our critical mission going forward is to make sure that we continue to operationalize our product development, but really our product manufacturing and how we ship, to make sure that the customer experiences a robust product that we're proud to use, right? Second is to make sure that our sales and marketing teams are really driven by how, every single person has a salary, is a cost, right? How do we make sure we turn all of that into big opportunity, right? And that ultimately translates into revenue attainment. So the goals for Nuclera is ultimately to be on that trajectory towards every single protein project starting on a protein discovery. How do we get there? Well, we know that for that path, most of that work and this is our internal market studies, most of that protein project spend is occurring in large life science enterprise, right? So that's big pharma, that's big CRO, CDMOs, catalog reagent providers. Those are the folks that we need to really figure out how to properly segment and evaluate the marketing activities against what we're our funnel and revenue attainment metrics. So that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
That's what consumes my entire day, every single day, and recognizing that there are other forms of investment. So at Nuclera, we still have product development, right? So we're continuously thinking about next gen and what that product roadmap looks like. I'm sure that that the equivalent to your company, Jon, is your developers and how you think about expanding your business, right? So that's what we're always thinking about, and we're trying to tie all of these together into short-term and long-term investments, and think about it as a portfolio of investments, and that's ultimately how we look at our budgets, right? When we set. And we started out this conversation, it's budget season. Yep. Season.
Absolutely.
Managing this portfolio of investments to make sure that we properly allocate for short-term and long-term investments.
Absolutely.
Short-term, mid-term, and long-term gains in the form of revenue and profitability. So that's Nuclera. We're just going to be out there at trade shows, at conferences, making sure that we get our name out there with Big Pharma, and making sure that we install and make each customer happy one by one, okay, in the protein maker space. So that's where I think potentially Nuclera and Exceeder,
that's super exciting.
Synergistic with each other.
Yeah, and go to market. we can do all the buzzwords. I'm super excited. That's really, really cool, and I love learning about Nuclera and your journey. And on a more personal level, the two closing questions I usually have is, would you like to give any shout outs to anyone who has supported you throughout your career?
It's all standing on the shoulders, right? Shout outs. First of all, thank you for having me on this podcast. I don't know how you find time. Life. It must be because you don't have children. I don't have children either, right? But I would not have the mental capacity to have this type of podcast series. Running a company. I am running a company right now. It's just that's all I can think about. So you doing this means you have a really good team around you. So kudos to that. Thank you for having us on the show, and thank you, one of the exciting folks to talk to. So really appreciate that. Who else? You can always point to people along the way that enabled you, right? I guess we started at my childhood, and I have to start with my parents. They gave birth to me, and trained me and made me who I am, and set me on. They were the leading indicator, let's say, to what brought me here today. My co-founders, who every business needs a team, and that initial team are your co-founders, and your co-founders put up with a lot of shit to be able to get to where you need to be. Some depart, some stay on and become even better and smarter than you, right? And it's that team of how many people you surround yourself with, and how that evolves over time, and how much smarter than they are than you, that determines the success ultimately of your business. So all of our investors, all of our customers, I always like to say that a life science tools company is attracting a lot of investment at the expense of the people who are actually doing the drug hunting, right? So people who are doing the drug hunting, they are actually trying to make people's lives better by delivering new molecules, new therapies, right? So all the tools and services out there are enabling that function, right? That pursuit. And so you gotta really, ethically, morally, you gotta really believe that if you're in the tools and services space in biotech, that you are helping that pursuit, because ultimately that's what this entire industry is geared towards: quality and length of life, right? So our mission is to make sure that ultimately all of this translates into accelerated discovery. So really thankful to all of our customers who are drug discovery or agri-biotech, or someone who's trying to add value to society. And so that's ultimately why we're here.
Absolutely. And that I'm having like an emphatic response, because that's how we think about it too, because that's what we're trying to do as well. Like I feel like we have like the Venn diagram, which is like usually like some overlap, but there's kind of like a circle of overlap. So it's just a circle, it's not a Venn diagram. We're trying to enable the folks who are doing the hard work to be able to do their best work. So it's really beautiful. And the last closing question, if you could give any advice to your 21-year-old self, what would it be?
Do not go on that 21st birthday. Do not.
Yeah, don't do it. It's not worth it.
You will be washing your feet off in a Georgia Tech fountain off of your vomit, right? So do not do that.
Wise words. Well, Michael,
wake up with like Sharpie all over your face and back. Yeah. So do not do that.
Don't do that. Michael, this has been a blast. Thank you for your time.
That's all for this episode of the Biotech Startups podcast. We hope you enjoyed our 2-part series with Michael Chen. Be sure to tune into our next series with Chris Moxham, co-founder, CEO, and Chief Scientific Officer of Transcriptor Bio, a pioneering biotech company that is charting a faster path in drug discovery to create better lives for people around the world. With data from hundreds of millions of experiments, Transcriptor has mapped the effects of thousands of compounds on gene expression to discover new therapies. Their drug gene atlas maps molecular structure and drug action to the whole cell transcriptome, revealing therapeutic candidates that rebalance gene expression to treat disease. Transcriptor's proprietary artificial intelligence modeling suite, Conductor AI, uses their drug gene atlas to discover and predict the effects of new drugs at transcriptome scale. As for Chris, he earned his PhD in molecular and cellular pharmacology at Stony Brook University, and is a seasoned veteran with over 25 years of drug discovery experience, having spent 2 decades at Eli Lilly, where he was instrumental in advancing over 10 molecules into clinical trials across multiple therapeutic areas, and both small and large molecule modalities. Chris is a wealth of knowledge, and his commitment to both scientific advancement and team growth makes his insights invaluable for aspiring leaders in biotech. The Biotech Startups podcast is produced by Exceeder. Don't want to miss an episode? Search for the Biotech Startups podcast wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. Exceeder provides research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support paths to exceptional outcomes. To learn more, visit our website www.exceeder.com. On behalf of the team here at Exceeder, thanks for listening. The Biotech Startups podcast provides general insights into the life science sector through the experiences of its guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from the podcast is at the user's own risk. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not the views of Exceeder or sponsors. No reference to any product, service, or company in the podcast is an endorsement by Exceeder or its guests.